Hi there. It's July the 19th, and we're continuing our journey through Paul's letter to the Romans, and we're in chapter 5, reading from verses 6 through to the end of the chapter in verse 21. This chapter 5 actually is the beginning of Paul's second section of the letter to the Romans. He's completed in chapters 1 to 4 the overview of man's condition and pointed to the fact that it's through promise and through grace and through faith that God is going to bless and God has favoured us. And that's particularly typified both for Jews and Greeks by Abraham. Now, in chapter 5 and through to chapter 8, Paul is moving on to the whole theme of what Jesus has done and the free grace of God which has been given to us through him to such an amazing measure. And so he starts off by pointing out very clearly how amazing it is that God has sent Jesus, that Jesus has given himself for us because we were enemies of God. He says it's possible that someone might die for a good man, but Jesus has shown his love for us. God has shown his love for us because while we were still in our failures, while we were still in this state of sin, Jesus has died for us. Not only that, but God has also reconciled us to himself through Jesus. So we are now in a place of continuing relationship with him. But not only that, Paul says, we can celebrate this. We can just be really grateful. We can be excited about this. We now have this new relationship with God through this reconciliation with Jesus. He then says it's quite clear that because failure entered into the world through one person, that is Adam, it entered in and affected all of us. So also God's grace and God's favour through Jesus can enter in and affect every person. Paul then homes in and says, look, this sin, this failure existed before the law happened. It's not all about Torah. It's not all about the commandments. Sin was already in place from the early times, from man's break of relationship with God is what he's trying to say. And actually the law was just brought in as a kind of a measure, as a calculator of just how far we were from God and how much we needed his grace and favour. But actually God brings us into relationship with himself because just as that sin, that failure of the first man and woman led to our separation from God, so this reconciliation that comes through Jesus now is available to every person, and we can find our original purpose. Paul says that we can reign in life through the man Jesus Messiah. That reign in life doesn't just mean have a good time in life. It actually means complete, fulfill the purpose that God first called man for, to be his regent, to be his image on the earth, and to represent him both as the prophet to creation and as the priest to God. And so just as that trespass, that sin, that failure resulted in condemnation for everybody, so through the obedience of Jesus, Paul says, we are now accepted, we are now received. So he says the law actually was making sure that we understood. The law was the Torah was part of the whole story. It wasn't the way of God frightening his people. It was actually part of the unfolding of showing how people would live with God. And of course, now that we have the Holy Spirit, we're able to live in the power of that grace that he has given to us. And so Paul says towards the end of this chapter, where failure was so great, where failure was so big, grace, God's free gift, God's covenanted gift. This also links into this Hebrew word chesed, which is the Hebrew for grace. Chesed, this covenant commitment of God to us. It's not just God's whim, it's actually God's obligation to us. And this obligation has come to us through Jesus because of the covenant God has made, so that grace will reign. Grace will be in charge into the ages to come. The Torah is no longer in charge in that sense. It is now God's covenant grace, his chesed, his promise fulfilled to Abraham, that is in charge because of what Messiah Jesus has done. What amazing words these are that Paul encourages us with. No wonder we can, as Paul says, celebrate in God. No wonder we not only have reconciliation, but we have the celebration of what God has done. Let's celebrate this amazing salvation that he's brought to us, this amazing covenant that we are part of and drawn into because of Messiah Jesus. Have a very good July 19th.